When it comes to Father's Day, some things never change. Dads want steak. And the experts at Omaha Steaks are making it easy for you to deliver uncompromising quality with gifts that are sure to make his day. Plus, get an extra $35 off with code THANKSDAD when you shop omahasteaks.com today. We know, being your dad means he already has everything he could want. But just picture the look on his face when he sees those extra-aged USDA-certified tender steaks, juicy air-chilled chicken, beefy burgers, and more. With carefully curated gift packages from America's original butcher, it's never been easier to show everyone why you're dad's favorite. And every bite is 100% guaranteed to bring a thrill to the king of the grill. Shop now at omahasteaks.com and get an extra $35 off with code THANKSDAD. But don't wait. Father's Day is June 15th. Minimum purchase may apply. See site for details.
You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
On June 28, 1988, a water worker checking a water station in the desert south of Florence Junction, Arizona, saw buzzards circling overhead nearby. He walked over to see what was interesting them, and as he got closer, he smelled decomposition. Where the birds were focused, a human bone was sticking straight up out of the ground. The worker called the Pinal County Sheriff's Department. Deputies responded to the water station, 1/4 mile west of US 79, and the worker pointed out the exposed bone. The deputies noted that the bone appeared to be human. It was an upper right arm bone, the humerus, and it was nearly skeletonized, devoid of most tissue. The lower arm bone and hand bones were scattered on the ground nearby. The deputies were hesitant to try to remove the body for fear of damaging the bones and disrupting a crime scene. So they called an expert they often consulted, Dr. Walter Birkby, an anthropologist at the University of Arizona. A word about Dr. Birkby here. This is from the Arizona Daily Star. Known as Dr. Death, quote, Birkby was a nationally recognized expert in human identification and was called in to substantiate locks of Beethoven's hair and look for signs of cannibalism on the exhumed bones of the notorious Alfred Packer Party, end quote. Dr. Birkby was also an employee of the Pinal County Medical Examiner, which handled complicated cases for agencies both inside and outside the county. So Pinal County called up Dr. Birkby's office and asked them to send some experts out to extract the body from its sandy grave and conduct an autopsy. Dr. Birkby was on vacation, so his graduate students in the University of Arizona Forensic Anthropology program were dispatched. One of them was now Dr. Bruce Anderson, son of a police officer and the current Pima County Medical Examiner. The graduate students drove from Tucson up to the site listed as 2825 East District Street, in the desert. When they arrived, they were prepared for a delicate and painstaking dig and sift operation, assuming that they would be dealing with a skeleton. That was not the case. The budding anthropologists had noted the sticking up arm bone and the forearm bones and hand bones lying nearby. They had concluded that it was likely the arm became exposed from some heavy recent rains, as the grave was shallow. Birds had seized on the arm and tugged it further out of the ground, stripping it of the flesh and disarticulating it. But they had not gotten to the rest of the body, which was still buried in a wash, which is a sandy, dry stream bed. Other than the arm that had been skeletonized by avian activity, the rest of the body had been preserved by the sand and clay. It took only a couple of hours to disinter the intact remains. They were in an advanced stage of decomposition, but the body wasn't disarticulated and ample desiccated flesh remained. When the soil was dug away and the body was removed from the shallow grave, the forensic anthropology students discovered they were looking at a 5'3" or 5'4" tall white woman still wearing identifiable clothing. She had no identification on her, and there was none in the grave. The University of Arizona team put the body in a body bag and took her back to Tucson for autopsy and analysis at the Pinal County Office of the Medical Examiner. Their examination revealed that the woman was very likely quite elderly. 4-inch-long gray hair still clung to her skull. Her skeleton exhibited a hunched spine resulting from spina bifida of the sacrum, osteoporosis, and something called diffuse idiopathic skeletal hyperostosis, a type of spinal arthritis. She had osteoarthritis in the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebrae, with fusion of vertebral bodies T9 to T10, T12 to L1 and L2. She also had compression fractures of the T7 to T11 vertebrae, resulting in significant kyphosis, or spinal curvature. All of these conditions are quite common for persons of advanced years. Jane Doe also had a full set of upper dentures, again, consistent with her being elderly. The anthropologist noted that this was quite an unusual case. It wasn't common for murder victims buried in shallow graves to be geriatrics. Think of all the cases of elderly victims whose murders I have covered. They were all killed and left in their homes. This woman was murdered and buried in the desert. Wait, you're saying, who said anything about murder? Jane Doe's death was no accident or natural death due to age. She had been strangled. When Jane Doe was removed from her shallow grave, she still had a cord tied around her neck. Whoever had strangled her didn't seem to care that he was giving away the cause of death. Without the attached ligature, with no broken hyoid bone, the pathologist and anthropologists might not have been able to determine her cause of death. This told them that the killer was someone who was unconcerned about trying to raise a defense that Jane Doe had died of natural causes. He or she knew no one would report her missing and planned on her never being found. So based on Jane Doe's physical characteristics, they knew she was pretty old, but they couldn't be 100% certain about her age, and they wanted to ensure that information they published would not deter people coming forward about both middle-aged and elderly missing persons. So her age was listed by the medical examiner's office as between 50 and 99. Based on the state of the remains, it was estimated that Jane Doe had likely died sometime late in the previous year, 1987 or early 1988. Jane Doe's clothing still on her body was of little help identifying her. She wore a bright yellow floral nightgown or housecoat with snap front closure, size 8 white underwear, and a bra. This wasn't something she would have gone out in. These were clothes for staying in. Also not helpful were her dental impressions and x-rays. No missing persons with similar dental characteristics had been reported. Her dentures led them nowhere. Further, fingerprints had not been obtainable from Jane Doe, so the APHIS database was of no help to the investigators. So, elderly Jane Doe's real identity remained a mystery. The investigators had no clue who she was, but they did have some clues as to her relationship with the person or persons who killed her. These were found in the circumstances of her burial. Dr. Anderson told me that typically a person trying to hide a murdered corpse is eager to do the quickest and least work possible, and this means digging the smallest hole possible. Most hastily buried bodies are crumpled up as small as possible and buried in the fetal position or face down, bent over the knees. This Doe was buried as if in a customary human grave. The grave, though shallow, was long and body-shaped, and Jane Doe was laid out on her back, fully extended, as she would be in a coffin. As I said, this was unusual. Whoever buried her took a little extra care, suggesting a personal element to their relationship. Her killer was possibly a family member or a caregiver. Jane Doe's clothes also pointed to a family member or caregiver. Her being in a nightgown or dressing gown implied that she was at home or in a care facility. Someone had access to her there, someone who knew or ensured that no one would call in a missing persons report. The 1988 investigators received an offer from an investigator in Pinal County to do a clay reconstruction of Jane Doe's face. The anthropology team had cleaned the bones of all flesh so that Jane Doe could be preserved above ground for repeated study. The Pinal investigator had experience in clay reconstruction, so Jane Doe's skull was sent to Pinal County and the clay reconstruction done and photographed. The photographs were published with requests for information. Then the clay was removed from the skull, and the skull was reunited with the rest of Jane Doe in a bone box at the lab run by Dr. Birkby. She remained there, in a numbered bone box with bone boxes of other unidentified human remains, until Dr. Birkby retired in 1996. Then, the Pinal County Office of the Medical Examiner transported all the unidentified human remains to their facility. Jane Doe remained with the medical examiner throughout 3 facility moves and 2.5 decades. On May 20th, 2010, Jane Doe was entered into NamUs as UP7209. Entering her into NamUs was a shot in the dark. Investigators speculated correctly that no one was looking for her. But some names were brought to their attention by other agencies and web sleuths, the names of missing women who fit Jane Doe's description. Using DNA extracted from Jane Doe's bones, authorities ruled out 13 women as being Jane Doe over the next 14 years. Doctor of Forensic Anthropology Bruce Anderson became the Pinal County Medical Examiner in 2011. He had personally responded to Jane Doe's crime scene way back in 1988 in his role as the senior forensic anthropology doctorate student under Dr. Birkby. 23 years after he helped unearth her from her desert grave, Jane Doe was still unidentified. Dr. Anderson saw to it that she was entered into the Doe network, hoping to reach a family member who might be missing her, even though he suspected that that was a very long shot. By 2023, Dr. Anderson was ready to identify Jane Doe once and for all. He approached the DNA Doe Project with her case. The $4,962 cost of preparing the SNP profile, uploading to the 2 open-source databases, and paying costs associated with the IgG analysis was paid for by 71 donors to the DDP. The nonprofit organization of volunteer genealogists features Does on its website who need funding, so please go over there and donate whatever you can. The DNA Doe Project worked with Astrea Forensics for extraction of DNA from Jane Doe's bones, and Azenta Life Sciences performed whole genome sequencing. Then Jane Doe's SNP profile was uploaded to GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. According to the DDP, a team of 9 genealogists working the case together on a weekend retreat identified Jane Doe's branch of a large family tree within a matter of hours. Essentially, when they uploaded her profile to the open-source databases, they found DNA relatives consistent with both first cousins and second cousins on both her paternal and maternal sides. This allowed them to quickly locate the most recent common ancestors, a married couple from the 19th century who immigrated to the U.S. from the UK. If Jane Doe was as elderly as was believed, then she was possibly the granddaughter of this couple. This from the DNA Doe Project. Her father was British, and her DNA relatives were spread across a broad geographic area. These included extended relatives in Canada, the UK, and Australia. But the genealogists knew they were looking for a family located in the southwestern United States. Based on public information such as birth and death certificates, the genealogists confirmed their theory that Jane Doe was the granddaughter of the ancestral couple from the UK. The woman they believed was Jane Doe was Evelyn Priscilla Gawan Lees. But one thing did not add up. Information online in a public family tree stated that Evelyn Lees died in 1998. Elderly Arizona Jane Doe had been found 10 years before that, in 1988. How could they reconcile this discrepancy? They were fairly certain that 1998 was the wrong date of death, but they could not locate a single death certificate or obituary for Evelyn Lees, so they had no way to prove it. This from Arizona Family, quoting Lance Daly, a volunteer investigative genetic genealogist with the DNA Doe Project. The burial details were unknown. The death date was odd to us. It was exactly 100 years old or the day before she would have turned 100. It looked like placeholder information. It was like someone just didn't know, like they didn't know when she died, so they put in this information. The lack of a death certificate would align with someone being a murdered Doe. So the DNA Doe Project reported their theory to the Pinal County authorities, who began investigating what had happened to Evelyn Lees. Okay, spoiler alert. Jane Doe was Evelyn Lees. Here's what we know about her life. Evelyn Priscilla Gawan, who went by Dottie, was born into a Mormon family in Salt Lake City, Utah, on September 11, 1898. Her father, George Gawan, had been born in the UK and immigrated at age 10 with his parents, James and Jeanette Deering Gawan. George Gawan's wife was Mary Isabel Bath Gawan, born in Utah. They had 4 children together: George, Clarence, Jeanette, and Dottie. Dottie attended high school in Salt Lake City for only a very short time because her mom died, and she had to drop out to raise her 2 younger brothers. Then at age 22, in June 1920, she married Earl Russell Lees. Dottie and Earl had no children of her own, but Dottie's brother George died in the late 1930s, and Dottie and Earl took in George's 2 adolescent sons, Lynn and George Gawan. It appears from 1940 census data that Lynn and George were residing in Salt Lake City with Dottie and Earl, as well as Dottie's father George. By 1950, the junior George and Lynn had grown up and moved out, and it was just Dottie and Earl in the household. In 1956, Earl, who worked for Union Pacific, died. His Union Pacific pension started making payments to his surviving wife, Dottie, who also collected her husband's Social Security. She had never worked outside the home. She had always been a homemaker. So once Earl died, she relied on those monies to live on. Although Dottie had spent the vast majority of her life in Utah, her last known address was in Scottsdale, Arizona. But she just vanished. The Pinal County, Arizona authorities were not able to find any record of her death or any missing persons report for her. They knew only that she had turned up strangled in a shallow grave in late 1988, and they estimated that she had died in late 87 or early 1988 when she was 88 or 89 years old. Pinal County Sheriff Mark Lamb said in a statement, quote, "For an elderly grandmother to be a victim of a violent crime and then to remain unidentified for 36 years is a tragedy. We are grateful to the DNA Doe Project, its donors, and Dr. Bruce Anderson with the Pinal County Office of the Medical Examiner, who all helped give this woman some peace in death," end quote. Okay, so who killed Dottie? I can't tell you definitively. I wish I could. All I can do is give you the information I know and let you read between the lines. Read between the lines very carefully. Remember that in the late 1930s, Dottie took in her 2 young nephews, George and Lynn, to live with her and her husband, Earl. Earl died in 1956, and Dottie relied on his Union Pacific pension and his Social Security. She was firmly rooted in Salt Lake City. Her parents and siblings were all dead, but she had a niece in the area and was a devoted member of the Mormon Church. She planned to live there until her death, having purchased a burial plot next to her beloved husband and a long-term care contract that was valid only in Utah. At some point in the 1970s, her nephew Lynn and his wife came to Salt Lake City from Scottsdale, Arizona to visit family. Dottie was noted to be in her 70s at this point, with back problems, hunched posture, and a shuffling gait, all likely caused by deterioration to her spine that was observed in her autopsy. According to a niece of Dottie's who still lives in Salt Lake City, Lynn demanded that Dottie return to live with him and his wife in Arizona so he could care for her. Dottie didn't want to go, citing her roots in the Salt Lake community and arrangements for her care and death. But Lynn got his way, and Dottie relocated to their ranch-style home in Scottsdale. At some point thereafter, Dottie was placed in hospice care in Scottsdale. This is also according to surviving family members who remember what they were told about Dottie. But this hospice wasn't an actual accredited medical facility. Back then, anyone could open an air-quote hospice, staff it with a nurse, and collect payment for care for the patients. It was all unregulated. Dottie was placed in some kind of residential home in Scottsdale. We know that to be true because her nieces in Scottsdale recall visiting her there and helping her with her hair. But modern investigators have not been able to locate this place or determine anyone who was connected to it. And that's the last thing anyone knew of Dottie, other than that she was killed right around the beginning of 1988. But Dottie's pension continued to be collected for another 10 years. The pension checks were mailed to the home owned by Lynn Gawan, Dottie's nephew, who insisted that he be allowed to care for her. Because Union Pacific was not notified of Dottie's death, they continued to pay the pension, and someone continued to cash those checks on Dottie's behalf. Someone who had access to the mail at Lynn Gowan's home and possibly a power of attorney over Dottie's bank account. When the 2024 investigators were looking into what happened to Dottie, they contacted her niece in Salt Lake and additional nieces and a nephew in Arizona. At this point, they were just trying to figure out how Dottie ended up dead, and no one reported it. The nieces and nephew were very surprised when the investigators showed up. The family members were told, "We found Dottie. She died around early 1988. "No," said the nieces and nephew, "you got that wrong. She died a decade after that." One of Dottie's nieces told the Arizona investigators that her father, Lynn, had told his son and 5 daughters, sometime in the late 1980s, not to go visit Dottie anymore. He said she had advanced Alzheimer's and had turned mean and angry the way some patients with that affliction can. He told his kids, "You should remember Grandma the way she was." So no one in the family visited Dottie thinking that she was ill, but in fact, she was dead. This niece commented that she remembered thinking it was odd and finding it unsettling that her father, Lynn, told her to mail all greeting cards, letters, and gifts to Dottie to his home, rather than to the hospice where he said she was residing. And then this. The nieces recalled that in 1998, Union Pacific announced plans to send company representatives to Scottsdale in honor of Dottie's 100th birthday. They were going to give her an award for being the oldest survivor still collecting pension benefits. Lynn somehow made sure that visit from Union Pacific did not happen. Someone continued to collect those pension checks mailed to Dottie, care of Lynn Gowan, until 1999. I don't know if they finally expired at that time, or someone finally told Union Pacific that Dottie was deceased. Around this time, the nieces and nephew were told that Dottie had passed away too. When one of the nieces inquired about Dottie's cremains, after being told she had passed, Lynn's wife, Carell, told her that there had been a mix-up at the crematorium, so they had no cremains to bury. So that's as close as I'm going to get to naming names in this case. As soon as Lynn Gowan's relatives saw the writing on the wall and the focus of the investigators' attention, they stopped cooperating with the investigation. It's easy to see why. They simply don't want to believe that their father or their Uncle George or both had anything to do with Dottie's demise. Lynn Gowan died in 2005. His brother George had also lived in Scottsdale but traveled quite a bit in the 70s and 80s for work. He, too, died in 2005. Lynn's obituary describes him as a loving husband and father, a World War II merchant marine, a civil engineer, a golfer, card enthusiast, Trivial Pursuit fan, and great-grandfather to 8. He sounds like a great guy. But consider that he didn't ever report Dottie missing. Instead, someone disappeared her. Consider that her pension checks went to Lynn's home and continued to be cashed for 10 years. Consider that Dottie was buried in the desert by someone with evident attachment to her who took the time to dig her a proper grave. What's more, there was a massive water tank right near Dottie's grave. On Google Maps, it's called the Mormon Tank. Dottie was a Mormon. The water tank is 45 minutes from Scottsdale in the middle of nowhere. Is Dottie being buried right near that a coincidence? The Pinal County Sheriff's Office has law enforcement jurisdiction over Dottie's case. Dr. Anderson has provided them with his report containing all the findings we have just discussed. But the Pinal authorities have hinted that they are not planning to pursue Dottie's case further. The 2 sibling suspects in the case, both of whom I have named in this episode, are dead, as are their spouses. The Pinal investigators don't seem to be planning on taking the steps that investigators would typically take to solve an unsolved homicide, testing Dottie's ligature and nightgown for foreign DNA, trying to track down the hospice where she supposedly resided for a time, trying to locate neighbors of the Gowans from Villa del Sol who might have seen something, and so on. I guess that's because they pretty much know who did it. Almost certainly the same person or persons benefiting from the pension fraud that was being perpetrated. Hopefully, Dr. Anderson's report is being reviewed, and the Pinal County authorities are still working to piece together the whole picture of what exactly happened to Dottie Lees. Once they have wrapped up their investigation, I am hopeful that more information will be released to the public in some form or another. In the meantime, R.I.P. Dottie. I really hope you get some form of justice. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to dnaidpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.